When it comes to cybersecurity, the biggest threats are the ones you never see coming. SecureWorks detects and responds to cyber attackers' ever-changing tactics. We come armed with Taegis, a security analytics platform designed to recognize attacks and stop them before they do harm. SecureWorks, defending every corner of cyberspace. Learn more at securityweekly.com/SecureWorks. Can your incident response technology collect from off-network endpoints? Xterra FTK Enterprise can. Endpoints are no longer located in a physical office, and organizations need a comprehensive investigation tool that enables holistic data collection and review. With FTK Enterprise, you can also scan for IOCs and MISP indicators. You can scan with Yara rules, and you can use integrations to trigger automatic endpoint collections. Visit securityweekly.com/Xterra for access to their white paper, Incident Response for a Remote World. The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation of cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, and prove compliance in audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and technical training at securityweekly.com/on-demand. This interview is sponsored by Tanium. Today we're going to interview Tim Morris. He joins us to talk about this year's Cybersecurity Awareness Month theme, See Yourself in Cyber. Before joining Tanium, Tim spent over 20 years at Wells Fargo wearing all the hats. For 20 years, I'm sure that is the case. Most recently, he held the lead cyber threat engineer and research teams within information and cybersecurity at Wells Fargo. Welcome to the show, Tim.
Nice to be here. Thanks for the invite and the opportunity.
Absolutely. 20 years at Wells Fargo. That was quite the mouthful of a huge team over there. I'm sure that was a lot of great stories that happened.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, and I have to show my age and my gray hair, which there's no guess. But anyway, yeah, went there for a Y2K project to prevent the world from falling apart, packaging Windows software as a Linux and Unix guy, and then ended up there for a very, very long time. So a lot of merger and acquisition work, ended up in security. Turns out when you can package software, you get caught into all the malware outbreaks because you learn how to troubleshoot applications really fast. And so that malware career led into incident response and cyber career. So it's very fruitful years, but I decided to give it up about in May of last year after 22 years. And now on the vendor side, which is kind of fun because now I get to meet with lots of different customers who have large and complex networks that I was used to working on and helping them out. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Switching that hat from the buyer to the actual vendor and the seller. I bet that provides some great insights, not only from the selling standpoint, but actually finding the customers that need the products and being able to sell that appropriately.
Yeah, the sales side is very different to me, being on the other side. I was very fortunate that Wells Fargo was on the cutting edge of cybersecurity stuff, especially around 2008 or 9 when we started building the practice. Then I moved into it full time around about 2009. 2012, we made a huge change. The trend kind of started for these fusion centers, SecOps and security operations centers moved into fusion centers. It gives you the authority and the autonomy to actually take action during incident response, because prior to that, it really was playing whack-a-mole and trying to go chase things and figure out which server belonged to which line of business and then try to get the access you needed to do something about it. So doing that, but being on the technology side, because I'm an engineer at heart, I got tired of these, problems looking for, or solutions looking for problems. So take an engineering approach where we actually define the problem itself. We helped a lot of startups, in the time I was there, and big companies still do that, right? They define a solution or a problem, they give the functional requirements, then a solution is built out. And being on the other side, you're always trying to debate whether or not the build versus buy. When you have the resources and development team to go develop something, or do you actually go buy something? Turns out for us, other than some of the big commoditized stuff, a lot of things we were looking for around incident response, we had to do a hybrid approach where we would work with a startup, give them a lot of functional requirements to meet the needs. And I watched several of these companies either get bought up by larger companies or go public. So matter of fact, that's why at the bank we had a pretty good, after a while, realized we were doing a lot of this. We started already had one, but revamped a patent program. So a lot of the engineers were able to get their names to patents and get those things out there. But you're right, coming to this side, I still love solving business problems, and Tanium is a great platform to do that. I've used it in the trenches, for a long time, for incident response, and then all the endpoint management stuff you can think about, whether that's compliant patching, software deployment, integrity monitoring, threat hunting, all those kind of things. It can do all those. But it is fun, being on this side and just seeing the problems from a different light, seeing different levels of maturity within IT organizations or within security organizations themselves. So it's been quite the ride, being on the side and learning more about it from a totally different point of view, because you can get a little bit of tunnel vision when you're stuck. Even though I was, again, very, very fortunate, we had a very forward-thinking group, had a lot of resources to go do what needed to be done to protect the bank and the customers' data, and most importantly, money.
Yeah, that's definitely very interesting, and that is invaluable, I think, from the ops side and sysadmin side, even engineering side, being able to take a lot of that experience and visibility and insight, bring that to the security side, where you spent a great deal of time building stuff, and kind of the build versus buy scenarios. Those are super interesting problems from a financial sector, but now getting to see that from the vendor side and a lot of different verticals. Is there any kind of advice and kind of flow over the last 20 years that you can offer someone that is maybe coming up in any one of those different verticals?
Well, what I learned is everybody wanted to go chasing the next best thing. So yeah, I used to be a cert junkie for a while when I was not managing and leading teams. So going after whatever the next vendor cert was. I mean, I can go back to Novell. I did, Cisco, Red Hat, Microsoft, and everybody would always ask, well, what do I learn first? What do I need to learn? And what I always tell folks, whatever discipline you're in, let's say you're a developer, you learn the development skills themselves. Yes, you're going to learn languages and what they can do, but understand, how to do logic and do that kind of stuff. If you're going to be in the admin space, whether you're packaging or writing software, learn a discipline in the operating system. I mean, I learned a ton just doing merger and acquisition back in the early 2000s, just writing scripts to be able to migrate, a set of machines from one domain to another domain. And so all the skills I learned there, all the networking skills, the operating system skills, how things work, then just led in to engrave a great foundation, I would say, to a career in cyber. So when I would look at the build versus buy, there's a financial side of it that I kind of learned and figured out, okay, and a development FTE costs this much, it costs this much to run a triple environment, meaning production, dev, and test, tucks this much to handle the whole life cycle, that kind of stuff. And is that worth me going and buying a license to do that? Or is it worth me going and buying a service to do that? So those are things to learn. But I would still say back at the main skills, get the foundational stuff right. Understand, something that you can build upon, whether that's operating systems, networking, or development languages, or maybe you're not in a technical area at all. You're more in the business problem incident response stuff, do that stuff and do it well. As we always, it's kind of cliche to say servant leader, but be a leader in your own space so that you can go do these things. It just helps understand, because when you get an organization that's running very, very efficiently, it really has a bearing on whether you go build or buy something. Am I good at running off the shelf software, or am I better at buying it? Let the leaders, determine what's worth more to them, to do that. But it's very, very interesting. Now, being on the vendor side, one of the reasons I chose to come work for a vendor, when I retired, I wasn't retiring from working. I retired from the bank. Yeah, I had other banks call, I had other corporations call to go do security there. What was appealing was the fact I had got to the point with this company where there was a no contest of build versus buy. The technology had advanced so far, there was no way to really go build it or recreate it without not a huge level of expense. I mean, it was much cheaper to buy the platform and extend the platform than it was to go try to build something similar or different. So that's why I ended up here at a vendor, or at Tanium specific.
That's very interesting. And just based on our last guest talking about security operations at work, well, I mean, you're spot on. Really, wherever you're at, getting the understanding of how to do whatever you're doing well, but taking that and using that for your experience. If you're in a business, you're learning the business. If you're building relationship, each place you go, build that relationship, because you get to security, you need all of that political capital that you can get, and maintaining those relationships to do that well. So I think that's amazing advice.
You said a good point. Political capital, I don't think that's ever overused. Matter of fact, when I have bought technologies that I've had to spend political capital, meaning stake some reputations that, hey, we're going to spend this money, but I'm going to do this for you, meaning I'm going to remove this agent, or I'm going to take this process away, or I'm going to improve this process. And that's a big political mover to go do that and state that you're going to do that, because oftentimes projects get done, and even if they're on time and under budget, people don't really go back and measure the ROI to see if you did what you promised. I can promise you this, though, if you didn't do what you promised, your career kind of stagnates. It doesn't go any further. But when you do it well, and you do it in a way that people appreciate working with you, even if in your some kind of adversarial working, you get to an agreement, it only helps. And in this industry, people joke around the security industry or the IT industry being incestuous. People do leave, they go to other companies, and guess what? They show back up in other companies together. People end up working, they disperse, but then they congregate, and they disperse and congregate. So over a 20-year career, you get to know a lot of different people who you work for. So be careful about bridges you burn. Always be there to help the process, to help what it is you're doing to grow the business, to do what it is you need to do, and just be a good person doing it. I can't state that enough, because it not only helps the company or the team you're working with or working for, it helps you in the long run as well.
Yeah, that long run and that relationship building for a long-term strategy for not just your personal career, but for each of the companies you go to. We always stress that you really just need to be a nice person. That's a pretty easy thing to do. You make sure that you build someone up. If they're ready to leave, support them in that leave, because at some point you'll probably end up working with them again. It's a pretty small group for those of us that have been doing this for 2 or 3 decades that you're going to run back into them. So make sure you do it well.
I've seen that too often. I've had a couple. Oh, good. I was going to say, I've had a couple times in my career where the toughest conversations I received were people that were upset that I was taking a different opportunity, even within the same company. I was just moving to a different team or whatever. The best conversations are ones who want to help and support. So when I led a team, I was always encouragement. I'm not telling you go get your resume better, but I'm telling you how to get your resume better. I'm not telling you, hey, I want you off the team. You're doing a great job, but if you need help advancing your career, let's go, I'll help you do that, because it's going to come around. I know we wanted to shift gears. Let's talk about the cybersecurity stuff and about, I love the tagline about blurring the corporate and private identities and the blur between shades of gray of MFA, I think is what we were calling it. So looking forward to talking.
Adrian got real clever with shades of gray for MFA. It was speaking of political capital, you start to talk about bringing your own devices, blurring the lines between consumers and your enterprise networks. So really talking about how enterprises have a handle on identities and company data, and that company data living on personal devices or dealing with identities on personal devices. Do you think we're getting to a better place today, or are we much further out in the West than we actually thought at the beginning? And kind of what have you seen over the last 20 years having to deal with this kind of merger and blurring of the lines?
A couple things. I mean, just shortly, we're a lot further than I thought we would be, but at the same time, a long way from where we need to be. Meaning this stuff accelerated. And we can go back just before, there was an iPhone and tablet. So the first shift is this consumerization of IT. And there's kind of as a rule, we don't mix the two. You have your personal device, you have your work device, and you never mix the two. Matter of fact, our networks are built around it. We did VPNs. Then we get to this thing, I guess about 10 years ago when the BYOD stuff started kicking off. And then what do we do with that? And directly, because it's, in the the literal definition of a zero trust from a network perspective was that whole feudal kingdom, the moat and drawbridges. You get stuff, once you're inside, you're trusted everywhere inside. And now we got to get to this, which is a very explicit trust, implicit trust. Now we get to explicit trust where we really can't trust anything, meaning you have to trust each process. And that ties back to identities. Who is it that's making this call? Is it an API? Is it a machine? Is it a user? So when you go back to the BYOD place, what we have seen is that time people trying to delineate between their personal identity, their persona, and their professional one have really started to blur. And when COVID hit and you send so many people home, I know for us, we had about 60,000 remote capable workers that within 3 weeks, we accelerated or increased to 215,000 remote workers. That's a huge shift in the threat landscape. So that's the piece is like, where do we keep them? It's easier if you can say this is a corp device. Was easier. I won't say it's easy. It's easier if you can say this is a corp device and you only log in with this device. But even say a vendor like Apple, which you have to have multiple IDs if you want one for the other, and you got misinformation. You got corporations say, do not create an ID under our account. That's personal, or don't use your personal ID. And they're conflicting, right? It's a paradox and you're trying to figure out what to do. And I just don't think we're clear on that because you got companies with liability and trying to keep their policy. So, where does BYOD fit? And BYOD's, that toothpaste is out of the tube. It's happening. So with the manifestation of cloud and things coming in, now it's more identities per, service. So we've got this big move and have had for some time with SSO, single sign-on, to get folks going. So we changed and we say, okay, now you got to have complex passwords. Now we need to use, OTP, one-time passwords, and we need to move to MFA. And the attackers are moving. Yes, there's still dictionary attacks. There's still, password spraying and all that kind of stuff happening. And it's still successful, sadly, because people have weak, but in places where we have strong passwords, we have started to see the shift where the attackers are starting to take advantage of OTPs and understand that, hey, I can do an MFA bombing. I think it was the Uber or the Rockstar hack recently. I think they sent a message outside of a normal band through WhatsApp and said, hey, this IT department, those push notifications you're getting, please hit one. Just accept it. We'll be done here in a second. And then they get in. So that's kind of a worst case scenario. Well, not a worst case. It's a bad scenario that what happens. But this identity crisis, if you will, is a real problem that companies are trying to figure out what to deal with, or how to deal with, I should say.
I think you're spot on. And I think we're at the precipice where this actually becomes a bigger issue than we're even letting on. The risk to the business, I don't think has been properly articulated to the executives. And frankly, even the executives themselves are part of the issue, or outside of IT and security. We have executives that are not wanting to carry more than one phone. It is the norm today to have a single phone, have your company email on there with your Gmail. That also has TikTok and Candy Crush or whatever Chinese game is capturing all of your clipboard traffic. So we have this reliance and kind of smoke and mirrors that Apple's a secure device, Google's a secure device. It's fine. They're sandboxes. This is a modern device if we keep it updated. All these things that we are now relying on and making the norm. And then additionally adding on the single sign-on effect with MFA, just because we have MFA now, we're secure. All of these things are fine, when in reality, it is probably the exact opposite. The attacker doesn't have to go into your network where you have good visibility, good EDR, good detections. They're leveraging the single sign-on. They're using the SaaS applications to get to the exact same intellectual property, the exact same data that's going to cause access into the on-prem devices, and we're leveraging things like SMS pushes and or MFA that is, I would say, less than secure, but is providing a nice warm fuzzy. So we've got the warm fuzzy of the vendors, we've got the warm fuzzy of having our phones available and personal accounts with work accounts. We've got the warm fuzzies of MFA there. So I think are we on the precipice of having a disaster that cannot be remediated without a lot of uncomfortable conversations with most of the business?
Well, I think what we're having is, first of all, it's better. I would much rather have MFA of any sort than no MFA. What we're doing is, again, it's cat and mouse. Attackers are going to skate to where the puck is. They're going to figure out what's around that. So is it smoke or mirrors or not? I want to go back to your point of the phone. Now we have companies, it used to be reimbursing for a phone. Like you were assigned a phone or they reimbursed it. Now we're somewhere in the middle where, some companies, no more. I mean, you're going to have a personal phone anyway, so we'll give it. So they go back to the personas like you're talking about with the sandboxing and hope that does anything. And that's presenting some problems for companies too. I can't get into specifics, but I know there's lawsuits where companies are suing employees or vice versa on who has access to that data. It's my device, it's corporate data. So there's, and I don't know what the precedence has been set there. I just know that it's opened up a whole new can of worms. And anytime you do that and lawsuits, happen, there will be regulations later on, if they're not here already on how to do that. But back to the identity piece, that's the piece. And when you say identity, it means different things to different people. I'm thinking about personas. It's, everybody said, when you're growing up, lying is hard because you got to remember too much. And if you just tell the truth, well, multiple identities is hard. Like, okay, which one did I use for this? I mean, it's almost imperative now you have to have a password manager, just because, I was looking at mine the other day, there's like 198 different IDs in there. It's like, it's a lot. I want to keep separation. So if we just look, let's say, for example, for our personal life, in a corporate world, we say protect your crown jewels, understand your perimeter, use the principle of least privilege. When your personal life, what's closest to you? Yeah, your family, your friends, but in your identity, what means the most? It's your banking stuff, it's your healthcare stuff, then it's maybe your social stuff, and it kind of moves out. So it makes sense, like from a financial perspective, that my ID that I use, even though I may share it among my personal things, and maybe I don't, maybe I have separate Twitter IDs and Facebook or Instagram, which again is a whole lot to kind of keep up with if you want to have 9 multiple personalities, as in 9 identities. But you need to make sure that for the banking stuff, that I've got my credit reports locked, that I have alerting on every banking application that tells me when money was removed. You have to monitor your own security, so to speak. And I want to make sure the authentication to there is a complex password with some sort of MFA on there. So I limit what you call the blast radius if somebody gets that. So you say you get some identity report that says your email address and password have been found on the dark web, which is probably 60% of us. Well, then you need to make sure where else is that ID being used. And if you're not tracking that, like in a password manager, then you're just kind of blind, because you need to go, you may not be able to change the ID because it's logged in, but you can definitely change the password or the authentication mechanism in there. So what we're seeing is this problem, and what I've just described is all in the consumer space. That's your personal life. Now, when we tie that in the corporate side, it brings a whole new attack vector. I know when there's a certain risk calculation or calculus that goes on when you're sitting where you do this, and you don't have a choice. We got to send people home to work remote because we can't bring them in. Our knowledge workers are there. So it's not, are we going to increase more risk? We know we're increasing risk. It's like, how do we calculate that risk? And what are the risks? So I remember going through this exercise. So what do we need to do to take a device and send it home that somebody's going to use? Even if it's a corporate device, what are we going to do? Before, it was in an office. There was a badge system to get in. So physical security, is better than home security, and some would even argue that. But now it gets home, what does it need? Well, you better make sure your AV, EDR, XDR is up to date. Encryption is turned on. Your VPN software is there. What kind of VPN? Is it going to be a user-based VPN? Is it going to be a machine-based VPN? Is it going to be a combination of both? Those kind of things. And then, but what we learned and lost was, it goes home, I still can't protect it because I don't have access to the IoT devices in the home. Meaning, what if somebody takes an unpatched IoT device, say router or modem, misusing the word modem there for anybody who's been in the industry a long time, and somehow does something where they can affect DNS. So instead of me logging into Office 3 or MS 365, I'm logging into a rogue site and my credentials were just grabbed. So that's a whole nother risk that it oftentimes gets accepted because, okay, hopefully the VPN is safe enough and people will recognize it. We'll go back to the next level or whatever the defense in depth is. Whereas, okay, this machine gets, hacked, we can brick it, we have all the ability to do that. So that's where this gets really, really fuzzy. And again, we're not there yet, but what you're alluding to, it's not all smoke and mirrors, but it does cover a lot of the issues, but there's still more work to be done, especially when we get into the identity space. Again, I've talked about personal, I've talked about a corporate device, but now when you have a personal device, we're using a corporate identity, again, it changes the attack surface, it changes or the attack vectors and the risk that you got to calculate on whether, you're going to do it or not. And we're seeing hacks, from that, but because that's going on, because things just bleed together.
Yeah, I'm really surprised we did not see additional hacks, or maybe we did and we just didn't realize, a lot of the botnet traffic or a lot of the stealer malware and its implants. Like having everybody have those corporate devices at home. You've got a hostile network. You've got kids doing homework on poorly secured school websites, doing research at home. You've got the iPads, you've got the phones of the kids, the wife looking at TikTok, all of the things that would just be hard to accept from a risk standpoint in a corporate network that we've had to adjust to. And I think that's where a lot of the zero trust conversation got pushed so hard. And really that kind of got skewed, where we're talking about zero trust from a foundational and mindset and pillars of, good defense in depth or microsegmentation back in the day, like just doing good security. And we tried to put a blinky light box onto something that was more of a mindset. But that was, I think, a lot of the reasoning of why that sprung up so quick with so much money. But now taking it back to how do we think about that from a business risk standpoint of not only bring your own device to work and having corporate and public or your personal personas blurred, but how do you actually think about things like corporate coming to and from the remote work, where we have a hybrid now, and you're introducing those insecure devices or devices that have been in hostile networks back into the environment without having the ability to do in-depth check at scale?
Yeah, I've heard the debates on, for example, if it's a personal device, what can the company put on to protect it? Whether that's an agent like Tanium or an EDR, XDR tool. I remember a major breach at the beginning of COVID with one of the suppliers, and they were being issued corporate devices, but when they got hacked, it was like, we're coming to VD, they're just going to go into a VDI farm and we don't care what they have on it. That didn't work because that device was compromised. So therefore we had to give them devices and they get in there. So it gets into that kind of debate argument. But it does go back to zero trust, as you were talking about. And I think people don't realize they're using it as much as we think we are, is that we do not trust the device anymore. That's basically what you have to get down to. So the endpoint, when I said earlier, the user is the endpoint. If you walk that back to where it goes, obviously the browser is endpoint, because we have a lot of applications, in the cloud that are just going through the browser. Matter of fact, the days of thick applications, they said this 20 years ago, we wouldn't have thick applications. It's almost like we're doing full circle the mainframe. If you get back to my age, where every device becomes a dumb terminal and you just go back to the mainframe, except there's multiple mainframes in this case. There is, the Dropboxes, Office 365s, there's all these other devices. So, but what that means is patching is never more important. I mean, we find, malicious extensions in browsers all the time. They're acting as man in the middle, for lack of a better term, or person in the middle, however you want to say that. So keeping those things up to date, is super, super important. But again, you get to the point where you're not trusting it. And you got to remember, these aren't just blatant, okay, I don't care about security. What they are is there's a cost benefit ratio. And somewhere along the line, it's like, well, if I believe I can manage the risk, meaning I can manage each one, say the processes that are getting to the application, whether that's your, CRM, your customer system, or your Salesforce, sales system, or your, ticketing system. And I'm managing authentication in each one of those. And hopefully you remove some friction by doing some SSO, but it's on a device, as you use the word hostile, is like, well, the device can be hostile, but the communication channel between the two can be secured, with the encryption or whatever. And I'm not saying that we're completely there yet, and I don't want to sound completely naive, but that is exactly kind of where we're at. Is like, no, I'm going to secure the communication channel between the hostile device. So I don't care if it's hostile, I know that I'm authenticating this process or this ID, whether that be a service, a user, or a machine. And that's good enough. It's not worth the cost to go buy another degree and put in the old legacy stuff of the moat and drawbridges that we had before, or the feudal kingdoms or airport security or whatever analogy you want to use.
Do you think that's some of the reason why we haven't seen the FIDO2 and the physical hardware keys take off as fast as and the whole passwordless kind of movement take off and get adopted by many of the corporations, is because the cost benefit, for one, of getting the tokens out there, and then the usability and understanding from not just the end user, but the technical side of this stuff gets very difficult to understand for many people. I mean, that's why we have SIM swapping and we still have phones, even though that cost benefit payoff is something that we can quantify. I don't see as close a quantification to why we're not using the passwordless yet, other than the adoptability.
I think we're getting there. I think we are going to go there. So anything we can do to remove the friction of the authentication. I use the analogy of a house. Why do we have doors and windows on houses? We have so we can enter and we can see outside, but they're there to protect, right? You could live in a house without doors and windows, but you get wet and cold or hot, depending on the case. And then what's the first thing you do when you put on there? You put latches and locks. Well, those latches and locks are an inconvenience. If you think about it, passwords are inconvenience, So security always being the department to know, it's like, how does security enable the business? But back to your point, what happens is if we can remove the friction to move to good biometrics that works, whether that's a Face ID or fingerprinting. And yes, there is a cost, not just the physical cost of getting the transition done to that. But remember, we're still dealing with systems, even old systems are young, 20-year-old systems that are legacy. When I'm talking system, I'm talking about applications you have to get into. For them to ramp up to new authentication mechanisms, almost every time there's a new authentication mechanism, there's a layer in between to make it backwards compatible. So that's the real cost, and why I don't think we've moved much as fast as we should move. Yes, there is a cost of physical stuff, but anytime you do a physical key, and I'm a fan of FIDO and YubiKeys and that kind of stuff, but it does add a different level of friction, but it is more secure. But every time you do that, there's a technical aspect that you spoke to, that we got to train users to do that. But then, having managed exception processes before, how do you determine who has the keys it needs to have? This is the whole IAM process. How do you handle one that gets lost, or one that gets stolen? And having those processes, so those have to come along and catch up to speed, which makes it a little more difficult. If you think about help desk of the old, 80% of their time was spent reusing passwords. So we go to self-service models of password resets. Well, you got to get to that level with these other devices as well. Like, how do we do that? I'm sitting, in an airport somewhere and I've lost a key and I can't log into a critical system. How do I handle that? Right now with passwords, there's a way to give a one-time password to do that. You've got to make these legacy systems. So that's part of the reason, one, the cost of it, but two, the cost of transition to it and the processes required to make that happen. I do think we'll get there. I think, again, the more we can do to reduce the friction. So authentication is as simple as walking to a door and it opens for you, to speak figuratively, and know you're the one that has access to open that door or not. We'll get there. I mean, it might sound kind of sci-fi. I was at a conference a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, before COVID, and a guy had a thinking cap who could actually think his password and it would enter it into the keyboard. It was like some crazy stuff. I mean, I don't expect to be walking around full of caps, but my point is, we'll get to almost a sci-fi where that friction reduces, and you will see the adoption, to be able to do that.
So for in the interim, for places that do not have the ability to kind of get to that place of a more secure MFA, now that we're speaking about the Cybersecurity Awareness Month, there are protections for things like SIM swapping. You have your CFO, you've got high value, high target accounts that still want SMS, still want the push notifications. What are some of the things that we can do to add layers of security to the kind of legacy MFA or non-modern MFAs?
It depends on where you're at. At some point, those level that you've got to take a different approach. I used to manage a program that was a DR, disaster recovery BC program. How do we run things if the internet goes down? So how do you do that? I mean, we had to be in contact with carriers. Like, how do they do it if something's down? What's their backup plan for incident responders? Frontline folks like, law enforcement, emergency services, those kind of things. And you do almost have to go out of band. And I know it's inconvenient, but if you have somebody, say, whose face is on several thousand ATMs, you have to protect them differently. Personally, you have people. I was talking with someone who's big in the crypto space, and a lot of folks who do that have had the SIM swap, a couple times and have tens of thousands, not hundreds of thousands of dollars drained. You have to protect that differently, whether that's going with a different service that does not allow any kind of SIM swap, which is a whole different process. It's very different when you get to that level. But for the average users, there are some basic things you can do, meaning you can put SIM swap protection in with the carriers now. You need to go ahead and do that, whether that's using pins or whatever, put an extra layer of questions or security to do that, to make sure that can't happen. Because the more we rely on MFA, not just the SMS push notification, but if you're using an authenticator app, Google, Duo, Microsoft, that secret's on that box. Of course, you need something else, to get to that. But, that's basically 3 layers of protection, and you want to make sure that can't get moved to another device. So you got to put the protections in there. So anybody who's going through that process needs to really think about that, and then do the exercises. If you don't have a red team, at least, go read, or if you have the resources, hire somebody to figure out, okay, if I knew nothing and I could get to that executive's phone or that critical IT admin's phone, what would it take for them to do a virtual SIM swap, so to speak? And a SIM swap's kind of the wrong word, but I could take over their persona. What would it be? And then by doing that, you'll learn where the playbook falls short and where the program may fall short, and what you need to do to implement that. Back for our stuff, even some of our top level executives, we would still run separate VPNs into their homes. Just didn't let them use the other stuff because they were such high value targets. People were after them all the time, with certain attacks. Got stories I can't share, but the point is that's there, and you just have to treat them differently. And then for the IT admins, sysadmins, do an impact analysis on your thing. I work for Tanium. We have a way to do that, to see what your least privilege really looks like, essentially, or you run a tool like Bloodhound and see, hey, if I take over as this administrative assistant, or as this packager, or as this salesperson, what do I have access to? You would be surprised at how much lateral movement can happen, just because we're really good at giving access. We don't do a good job, we as an industry, of taking access away when it's no longer needed. And then there are just simple mistakes made. Somebody puts, a sales group in an admin group, domain admin groups. It can never happen. We need to be testing for that all the time. Those are things you can check all the time in a continuous basis. And honestly, when you look at it, the things that get us in the breaches and the attacks, I think I read a report last week for the first time, earlier this week actually, vulnerabilities have kind of eclipsed the lead over stolen credentials. So making sure your stuff is patched. Exchange has reared its ugly head again for on-prem Exchange, and not having a patch for that. But VPN concentrators and Exchange, I think, were 2 of the biggest reasons, companies are getting attacked. And then you still have what works, the phishing stuff. I was doing a session yesterday with a big employee panel that was doing for a large company. And that's why I was telling them, just be diligent, make sure that if you get email or a phishing attack and it evokes any kind of emotion, stop, because that's the trick. I get you to push this or get you to go to this link. And now it's not even, you still have the phishing emails, but now you get the SMS stuff that just kind of prompts a conversation, to try to lure you in. I was dealing with one an hour ago on LinkedIn. Somebody, I could tell they're just trying to probe and, and get information, do reconnaissance. So you just have to be diligent and just realize that people want your access, whether you think you have access or not. People want it. So just, again, be diligent when you get random stuff, you get emotional stuff. Even when I get legit stuff that says, hey, this charge showed up on your credit card. I never click on the link in that. I always just go to the app or go to a web browser and log in and go look at it myself. I never click links. And that's a habit that's kind of hard to get into, but it serves everyone wise to doing that.
I think that's a great point for Cybersecurity Awareness Month right there. Like, just be diligent, realize that every little person in the organization matters. Your creds matter, you matter, and try to make sure that you're doing that diligent work to not be the entry point, to not have the credentials that move an attacker to a better position on the network. And those tabletops and looking at the credentials and the points in network and all the different identities really does matter from an attacker standpoint. That's the single way we use, where we look for just any little breadcrumb to start pulling on a thread. Without the thread, we really have no other way in. And that's where you get into things like JWTs, tokens, cookies, all of the things that are on your device that have a meaning that you would never think about. Those are all in the back end for your single sign-on. Those are all within inside the browser, inside your password manager. All those little bits and pieces are something that can lead to an organization's downfall. And I think actually Katie had a question for us.
Sure.
I actually have a question going back a little bit, but I do want to pull on this thread of Cybersecurity Awareness Month, because I've been in conversations about this separately, and talking about the end user and what they can do, and don't click on this, and don't download that, and if you get an alert, check on this. That's all very well and good, but there are compounding issues, right? Because in our daily lives, we get legit PDFs and attachments, we get legit links, we get things that we need to do in our daily lives, and it's really hard sometimes when you're moving quickly to differentiate. I mean, it's one thing if the email says, I need you to urgently do XYZ, signed your CEO, and you never have any contact with your CEO, right? But if it's a really crafty attacker, then they're going to know that. They're going to be a little bit better than, oh my God, I need you to urgently, click this link and pay your overdue fee or whatever it is. So how do we balance that? Because I'm of the belief that it's not about awareness anyway. I'm of the belief that it's about behavior. But what are we training our users to do when we tell them don't click links, and then in the next breath, HR says, please fill out this benefits form. It's open enrollment next month. How do we balance that?
Bingo. And that used to be one of my pet peeves, is because we try to train folks to get into that behavior. And then we would have internal stuff that would send it. I manage a proxy, so I would see these all the times because I would have stuff blocked. And we're like, we just sent out this survey and users have to get to it. I'm like, well, but you didn't go through the process to make sure that was legitimate and could get through, because, but you're right on, Katie. I mean, it's a problem. As a user themselves, from a corporate standpoint, I always say just err on the side of caution. If you get something that, okay, it is open enrollment and you get it, or you get an email that says, hey, your bonus check is going to be delayed, or we're sorry, your bonus check the last time was more than it should have been. Here's some information to go correct that. I'll just report it. Even if it's legit, the folks inside the company who know they're legit, one, can go correct the behavior on the other end, meaning, hey, we need to do a better job, which honestly sometimes means being less convenient, meaning we don't send links, that we send instructions to go do something and not links, to go do them. And again, I know, having managed a red team, there's ways around that, but that behavior balance. But I would say, in the spirit of Awareness Month, everyone as a leader, everyone has to lead themselves. And that is to be aware of your own security sphere. Not just your work life, but in your private life. What is it that you expect, to hear? Is that your parents, your children's teachers, your local civic club or church or whatever? Know what it is and know what you can expect and help change the behaviors then. But always try to be on, I get a request, but instead of being just clicking through it, I'm going to go around and validate it. There's a validation process, which is not that hard, honestly. It's super easy if I get a text that says, hey, we need you to check this charge, here's a link, for me to just immediately pull up the banking app and look at the charge versus clicking on that SMS message. And that is a behavior that does have to change. But I do get it. You get all these messages inundated, but it either is, the ones that tend to work always evoke some kind of emotion. Yeah, there's the urgent ones. We get those from our quote CEO wanting gift cards because the country. Those are laughable. They're that bad. But then there are some that come in that do sound very, very legit, or they're a lead into, meaning there's not a link there. They're just trying to get you to start the conversation, and then maybe 2 or 3 texts later there will be a link or a phone call. You have to just be diligent, not and not get into those. And I know that's not I wish there was a way to say, hey, don't do it. But short of not having a phone and not checking email, you're going to be a target. You just have to get really, really good. And for all the admins out there, we do have to accept the fact that people are going to click links. So we need to make sure we have the correct defense in depth in place, whether that's at a network layer, that's at an endpoint layer, that can kind of catch some of that stuff. I caught multiple things with EDR tools, with email filtering, with web filtering that would catch over 90% of the stuff, would come through. But users themselves, all I can just say is just be diligent and realize that you are a target. And again, I go back to that the least privileged stuff on the corporate side. For those are doing the admin work, make sure that if a machine or user does get compromised, understand what could happen if they did. That's part of understanding your attack surface.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's excellent advice, and really kind of ties this cybersecurity awareness. Be diligent, know that you're a target. If you're an admin, work to that least privilege, really identify the threats that you have, and we can all work on this together, relying on technology to cover our butts and be the people that are there as the front lines. Really, it's everybody's job to be there, but that means realizing that people are there and going to make mistakes. So, Tim, we really do appreciate you coming on today and joining us for Enterprise Security Weekly.
Thank you all very much again for the time and opportunity. Appreciate it. Be happy to anytime. Thank you.
Absolutely. And our listeners, make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Tanium to learn more. And we'll be right back in a few moments to go over this week's enterprise news.